Oh, hi there. Tracy Brown here, and you are with me on the Inclusive Church. And I don't know, it is something about the theme music that I choose for every show that I do on the New Thought Media Network. And I guess it is intentional to get me moving, and that maybe as you're listening to it that it elevates your energy to just a little bit. But here we are. It is Tuesday. It is just afternoon mountain time, and we get to dive into what does it mean to be inclusive in our spiritual communities. How can we do that? What are some ideas to keep in mind? What are some conversations to have? What are some concepts to know and to commit to? And today we're going to be talking about the stories we tell. If this happens to be your first time seeing or being exposed to me or to the Inclusive Church show, I am the author of the book Stained Glass Spirit: Becoming a Spiritual Community Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness. And I get the opportunity to work with many communities that are on the journey and creating a roadmap for our churches and our spiritual communities to be inclusive, because it is a spiritual imperative. Because it is a spiritual imperative. And a couple of caveats that I do at the top of every show. If you've been with me before, you could probably repeat them or say them for me. That it's purposeful that I use inclusive church, not inclusive spirituality or inclusive spiritual community or inclusive ministry, because I am hoping you will join me in reclaiming the word church to mean the collection of people who come together to study, practice, learn about spirituality or whatever your belief system is. And this show is for leaders. That includes every minister, I hope, is a leader, but all of the people who serve in leadership roles in your church or in your spiritual community. And often we forget that many of our volunteers who are leading ministry teams, or who are donating on a regular basis, or serving on our leadership councils and boards of trustees. These are the folks who are leading the church into its next expression. And if you want to be like Anita, you can also put a hello, a greeting in the chat. And it's rainy where she is. I'm curious. Do you have sun? Do you have storms? Is it cloudy? What's going on in your part of the world? Feel free to drop that into the chat or the comment section, depending on which platform you are watching from. How did today's theme, the stories we tell, happen? It's a little bit of a story in itself. Actually, I was planning to do today's show and just title it Story Time, and was going to talk about lessons from the film Sinners that relate to inclusion and that point out some of the patterns that, especially related to race and class, come through that film. And I kept thinking in my mind, story time. And I was going to share my story of what happened when I went to see the film Sinners. But as Spirit would have it, I got a little nudge to open the book, Stained Glass Spirit, and it just fell open to the chapter titled The Stories We Tell. And as I thought about it, it's like, yeah, actually, that's what I want to focus on. And I don't think I have ever done a show in this series, Inclusive Church. I don't think I've ever done an episode where I simply read from the book. But that is what I'm going to do today, because when I looked at the chapter, and it's a pretty short chapter, 2.5 pages, with large type and lots of white space. But when I looked at it, I was going to just pull out a couple of things. And it's like, no, I can't pull that out if I don't read that. And I can't pull this out because it needs this other thing. So I'm going to read and comment as I go along the reading from the chapter. If you happen to have the book and you have it handy, I'm reading from pages 11 through 13, the stories we tell. I was facilitating a large workshop with several dozen people attending. At the end of a small group activity, we were sharing highlights and discussing challenges as a large group. One participant asked, "Why is diversity such a big problem? This is exhausting." The room got quiet, like so quiet, it feels as if every person is holding their breath. It felt to me inappropriate to reply with a brilliant quote from a social science, psychology, or leadership expert. It felt really inauthentic to just brush the question off as if it were unimportant or disruptive. It felt as if this participant had a question almost everyone in the room wanted to ask, but either didn't know how or didn't believe it would be acceptable to ask it. So I took a deep breath, not knowing exactly what words were going to come out of my mouth, and then I spoke pretty quietly but firmly. Diversity is not the problem. It's the stories we tell about diversity that are the problem. Whew. I was silent for a few seconds, and some thought I was pausing for dramatic effect. A few came up to me later in the day and shared they were glad I paused because they needed to take in the deep reality that we are our own worst enemies as a result of our stereotypes, judgments, and assumptions about people who are different from ourselves. But the reality is this: in that moment of silence, I was struck so deeply by the fact that the stories we make up are so hateful and damaging that in that moment, I just felt a bottomless and almost debilitating sadness that I couldn't speak. What I wanted to do actually was cry. I wanted to retreat to my hotel room and journal and pray and then journal some more. I wanted to run from the room and evaluate whether the work I was doing was even worth it. Who was I to think I could have enough impact to alter a pattern that was so overpowering and prevalent in all of our lives? Granted, this idea that diversity isn't bad was not new information for me. I had never articulated it in that way, though. So succinctly and so clearly, stripped of paragraphs of academic knowledge and the complete and comfortable jargon of applied behavioral science models and systems, the raw truth of our own responsibility for creating and constantly feeding the pain we say we don't want to experience, it was just overwhelming. The desire and the commitment to build stained glass spiritual communities requires us to recognize the stereotypes driving our assumptions, our reactions, and our limiting beliefs. The desire and the commitment to build stained glass spiritual communities requires us to recognize that we are telling stories that are not the truth. The desire and the commitment to build stained glass spiritual communities requires us to replace the filters through which we see the world on a regular basis. The same way we replace the filters that make the furnace in our home work well, or the filters we change in our cars to keep the engine in our car running efficiently. You may be correct when you say, but we're all human, but we're not all the same. The challenge isn't that we are biologically different. The challenge is that we have created and we continue to create or perpetuate false and negative stories about what the differences mean. The desire and the commitment to build stained glass spiritual communities requires us to tell a different story about ourselves, about other people, and about the world we want to live in. So let's change the narrative. Let's tell some different stories about all the ways we are different from one another. Let's flip the script and make diversity a positive instead of a negative. Will you join me? That's the end of that chapter. It's a pretty short chapter. And I love the reminder that, we feel uncomfortable often when we're engaging with people who are really different from us. We feel uncomfortable, or sometimes we even feel afraid because there's the story in our head that this group of people is difficult, or this identity group is dangerous, or this other identity group is a group I have nothing in common with. And so I'm not even going to engage with them or waste my time. Wow. If that's the story, if those are the kinds of stories that are in our heads, no wonder we find it hard to interrupt racism. No wonder we find it difficult to be comfortable in an environment where people look different from us or speak a different language. No wonder we are hesitant to initiate a conversation with someone from a different age group or from a different sexual identity group, sexual orientation, or gender identity group. We are simply reflecting how we have been socialized. And we live in a time where polarization is more the norm than collaboration. You're not like me, you're bad, I'm going to judge you because I am right, I am perfect, and you need to think the way I think and do what I do, or do what I tell you to do. We are the ones who can shift this when we remember that diversity is not the problem. The fact that we're different from one another, which is before this, it's in the beginning of the Stained Glass Spirit book. Diversity is a divine idea. if you believe, like I believe, that there is one creator that has created all of life and created it from itself in its own spiritual image and likeness, then the diversity that we see on the physical level cannot be a mistake. It cannot be an accident. It cannot be intentional. And if that's true, then our job living this human experience begins to be very clear. Our job is to demonstrate the principles of harmony or unity or love, the spiritual principle of love, the spiritual principle of harmony with all kinds of people, not just the people who we think of as just like us, but with everyone. And so the foundation of the inclusive church is really supported by this idea that diversity is a divine idea, and we are the ones who must shift the narrative. Right. So, how do we do that? And how do we do that in our spiritual community? For one thing, a lot of times when we say the word diversity nowadays, there are still many, many people who think we're only talking about race. And if they're uncomfortable talking about race or racism or race relations, then they're going to run as far away from the conversation as they possibly can. But what we know, we that are doing this work and we that are being leaders and creating stained glass spirit communities, we know that diversity is about all the ways that we are different from one another, both genetically and culturally, and that all of us are members of multiple identity groups, right? Yes, I'm a Black person. I'm also in an identity group called women. I'm in an identity group called baby boomers based on the generation that I was born within. I'm in an identity group called authors or New Thought Media hosts. I'm in an identity group that is labeled roller skaters. I'm in an identity group based on my gender that would be aunt or that would be godmother, right? We all have multiple identity groups. So race and ethnicity is just one, or actually those are two of the groups that every one of us are part of. And so it's nonsensical for us to be afraid to talk about it, admit it, or be curious about it. So I'm inviting you this week to think about all the identity groups that you are part of and to actually, as Alan Alda says in a quote, we must clean our filters, right? Our assumptions are like the filters through which we see the world, and we must clean them every now and then. So think about how the filters are the windows through which you see the world, and what are the filters that you are seeing people who are from a different age group that you are in, or who are from a different ethnic group than you are a member of? What are the filters? What are the windows you are seeing them through? And are those windows crystal clear, or are those windows cloudy where you might want to clean them off and get curious about people who are in that identity group? We're the ones who can make the difference. There's no other way to do it. And in our spiritual communities, it shows up whether we are willing to tell a different story by the music we select, It shows up by the seating in our events or in our classes. It shows up by who we invite and how we invite them. It shows up by the images we use in our promotional and marketing materials, as well as in our teaching and uh, learning or development, spiritual development materials as well. Are you representing a lot of diversity in everything that you do? Are the examples that you use if you are giving a talk or providing orientation for new members, if you have a focused ministry or virtual ministry, how are you including the people who are online or the people who only interact with maybe once a quarter when you have an event? All of this is about transforming the diversity of the people you meet and that you serve, transforming that diversity into an environment where people feel valued and included. So, I love this quote. I actually do use this quote a lot. Diversity is not the problem. It's the stories we tell about the diversity that are the problem. So this week, I challenge you to be thinking about what are the stories you are telling? What are the stories you are telling with the words you use? But also, what are the stories you are telling through the images, through the examples, through the materials you distribute, even through the topics you choose? And this is true no matter what type of ministry you have. Are you really reaching out to and connecting with many different kinds of people? Now, I could turn this into a full blown talk slash lecture, but I'm not going to do that because for those of you who have been connected to Inclusive Church for a while, you already know that if I don't have a guest, I tend to keep the show to about 30 minutes. And when I have a guest, we go 50, 55 minutes because we're both sharing. So I'm going to be moving toward closing over the next 3 or 4 minutes, but I do not want to skip this comment from Amy. Diversity as an expression of the divine through individuation. That isn't necessarily about identity. It is more about from one to many, in which all is in all in an infinite number of ways to be expressed and experienced. And so I love the way that you've languaged that, Amy. And I would say from the work that I do with all kinds of groups and communities coming from many different spiritual lenses, that the identity is the representation of the multiplicity, or the fact that you have described how you have described the, come on, where's the sentence? The infinite number of ways to be expressed, right? So every way that is expressed, when it becomes physical, becomes a demonstration of a specific. And that's really funny that you would tap on the shoulder and say, by the way, this is Marjorie using my daughter's account. And it's funny because as I was reading it, I was like, this sure sounds like Marjorie. Marjorie would say this. So I love it that you have such a unique voice that it's recognizable no matter what name is attached to it. And that is the unique way that Spirit has created Marjorie as a unique expression. And so I want to be careful about I want to be careful about using identity. I think you have a really good point that sometimes when we think of identity in the context of current or recent political definitions, it becomes kind of like either a fighting ground or it's one thing. But when we understand that our individual and collective identities are the representation of the creative nature of Spirit expressing itself as this community or that community or this person and that person, then we can celebrate it all. We don't have to put it in a silo, and we don't have to judge it. We get to be curious about it. And that is my favorite word to use when I'm talking about the inclusive church, being committed to being curious about so many different ways that the divine is expressing, in this case, through 8+ billion people on the planet. But it is also, we know, true for all forms of creation. So that's today, that's the theme, the stories we tell. The call to action is for you to begin to think about and catch yourself. Like, what are the assumptions I'm making about this person or that person and how they are showing up? Even what are the assumptions I am making about myself and how I show up, and to be curious about it instead of judgmental about it. And then finally, to wrap all of that reflection into some journaling or some discussing and dialogue with others about how in your spiritual community this affects the programming, the relationships, the music, the message. And is it generating the sense of inclusion that you want to generate? And if it is, that means it's time to celebrate before setting a higher standard. And if it's not, then it's time to simply take a breath and choose, what will we do differently, or what is the new story that we want to tell about our spiritual community. I hope that you will be telling a story about inclusion. I hope you will be talking about how your spiritual community is just like a beautiful stained glass where there are so many different people and everyone is getting to have a positive experience as you worship together, as you study together, and as you live in this world together. My name is Tracy Brown. I'm so glad that you have joined me this week on the Inclusive Church, and I will see you again next Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, right here on the New Thought Media Network.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network. Come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.